Hello, my name is Giovanni, and my group members are Kimberly, Marissa, Katya, and Sarika. So, for our study, we are comparing ground force reactions during a volleyball spike using different footwear. So, here are two videos of a three-step approach toward volleyball spike. The video on your left-hand side will show a volleyball spike in real time, and the video on your right-hand side will show the same video in slow motion. So, the primary purpose of the study will be to compare differences between kinematics and ground reaction forces during a three-step approach of a volleyball spike using volleyball shoes and while barefoot.
We hypothesize that while wearing court shoes, the participant will demonstrate an increased jump height, increase in ground reaction forces, higher peak joint angles during flexion and extension, as well as greater time to completion from takeoff to landing. For our participant, we had a healthy college-age female with prior experience in volleyball to participate in this study. The participant performed a dynamic warm-up in preparation for the jumping modality. The participant performed 5 trials of the three-step approach jump while wearing court-specific shoes and then while being barefoot. For our data collection, we use a 12-camera 3D motion capture system to collect kinematic data at 120 Hz. Kinematic data was processed using Cortex and Visual 3D. Kinetic data was collected using force plates. We placed 46 reflective markers for the static, and 32 reflective markers were placed for the dynamic trials. Reflective markers were also placed on the lower extremities to track the movement of the hip, knee, and ankle. The 3 best performed trials were used for data analysis and the averages were extracted. As you can see on the bottom, we have 3 images of each of the phases, starting on the left with the takeoff, moving on to the flight phase, and finishing with the landing phase.
So for the data analysis, it was collected for the takeoff phase, the flight phase, and landing phase of the spike movement. The takeoff phase begins from the point of maximum knee flexion and ends when the toe leaves the ground. The flight phase begins from when the toes leave the ground and ends when the toes touch the ground again. And the landing phase begins from when the time the toes touch the ground and end at the point of maximum knee flexion. So the joint angles will be taken of the ankle, knee, and hip joint. Peak flexion were measured during the takeoff phase, peak extension were measured during the flight phase, and initial and final angles were measured during the landing phases. The ground reaction force measurements were taken during the landing phase. Jump height was measured from how far the foot gets off the ground during the takeoff phase, and time to completion measured from the start of the 3-step approach to landing when both feet make contact with the ground using Visual 3D. So for the results, Table 1 shows peak joint angles while barefoot and in court specific shoes during the takeoff phase. There was no difference in the peak takeoff phase. However, for the angle during extension, the ankle demonstrated more plantar flexion than the ankle during the barefoot modality. There was larger hip extension during the court-specific shoe modality as well.
This table represents the peak joint angles while being barefoot and while in court-specific shoes during the flight phase of the movement. As we can see here, there was more ankle plantar flexion and less knee flexion for the barefoot modality, and there was more hip extension for the court shoes modality. This table represents the joint angles during the landing phase of the movement. For the initial landing phase, so when the toes initially touched the ground, there seemed to have been more ankle plantar flexion, less knee flexion for the barefoot modality, while in the court shoe modality, there was more knee flexion. During the final landing phase of the movement, for the barefoot modality, there was more hip flexion, and for the court shoe modality, there was more knee flexion. The figure here represents the ground force reactions for the 3 trials for the 2 modalities taken as averages for both the barefoot and the court-specific shoes. Here you can see that the barefoot did demonstrate more ground reaction forces than the court shoe modality.
Finally, we found both jump height and time to completion. The barefoot condition showed a greater jump height than the court-specific shoe and also a decreased time to completion. There were a few limitations in our study. The participants seemingly changed their landing mechanics when wearing court shoes and began to land on their heels. This may be due to their previous ACL surgery and injury, so they may not have felt comfortable and confident. Their jumping mechanics may have resulted in decreased jump height and increased in time to completion while wearing court shoes. There was also difficulty capturing markers on the ankle. There is a greater ground reaction force while barefoot compared to court-specific shoes. Our hypothesis was incorrect as there was a decrease in jump height as well as a decrease in ground reaction forces with court-specific shoes. During the landing phase, the participant had more knee flexion in both initial contact and final contact. Wearing court-specific shoes can decrease the force placed on the ankle, hip, and knee. Footwear should be considered when playing volleyball. In terms of practical implication, this can possibly reduce the risk of injury specifically in the ankle and knee. The results indicated that more knee flexion and less ground reaction forces were present during the landing phase, so court-specific shoes can possibly reduce valgus loading. Importance: may help practitioners and clinicians understand the effects of different footwear on landing mechanics. Finally, further research should be done and include a larger sample size to determine the risk of injury. Finally, here are our references, and thank you for watching.